Well, we're on our way. Two Americans from Sweden speaking Danish in Cairo. We took the economy tour, which means we get the cheapest of everything. Our hotels are of such low quality they're not even rated, and it states on the brochure and elsewhere, we do not accept complaints on these hotels. We went out to the Giza pyramids this afternoon. My first impression was that I was impressed, but wasn't as overcome as I thought I'd be. It was quite a thrill, though, to crawl through the narrow passageways in Cheops' pyramid into the king's chamber. I didn't give a tip to our pyramid guide, and when Eric started to climb the pyramid, which is forbidden, he told us to get down, even though Arab kids were climbing all over the place on it. After seeing the pyramids, we hired a guide to show us the boat which they recently discovered behind the pyramid. I've seen pictures of it, and it must be about 150 feet long or so, but it is still being studied and has a building around it. No one can go near it, and it has police guards, but the guide got us on the grounds anyway. As we left, an Egyptian and a policeman stuck out their hands for tips, but I pointed to our guide. I didn't think the other Egyptian had earned anything, and I somehow couldn't bring myself to rewarding the policeman for neglecting his duty. We took a tour with our group to the Aswan Dam. They quoted some statistics to prove it was the most wonderful dam in the world, but one day they'll see it as a curse, not a blessing. All, or almost all, this poor country has is agriculture, growing on land close to the Nile. In times past, the river would flood these lands and leave rich deposits of silt. It seems that these lands are being quickly depleted, and those poor farmers on their 1/3 acre farms are seeing their productive capacity falling drastically. Before, they were able to get amazingly high yields from their lands, higher per acre yield than even America, but now it's a disaster. We left on a boat ride just opposite a Nubian village on an island. They were put on the island as their homes are now underwater behind the dam. On the island we were on, there were many ancient Egyptian writings on the large granite and basalt stones. There were inscriptions all over the island, and I took a picture of Eric standing by some. We just now got back on the plane from seeing Abu Simbel. It was very impressive and all I had hoped to see. They transported the monument from the lower level, now covered with water, and they did an excellent job. When they reconstructed the inner temple at the above level, they placed a large hemisphere above to support the Phony Hill. I'm glad we were able to look behind the temple to see this construction. There were, of course, the 4 large figures outside, 8 not quite so large figures as columns in the main room, behind which were high and long sculpted halls depicting Ramses as a great warrior, beloved of the gods, etc. He certainly had a high opinion of himself. I'm glad we came, though. It was short and we were rushed, but we saw everything, and seeing it gives all the pictures I've seen of it another dimension. I hope Eric will be able to remember it. We're on the bus now with our group to Luxor. We stopped at Kom Ombro, which was a temple dedicated to the crocodile god. It had a lot of columns still intact, and a lot of the ceiling. Eric found a room that contained about 10 mummified crocodiles, all very well preserved, skin and everything. They look like they're in better shape than most of the meat I see hanging in the shops they sell for food. Honestly. Eric found a whole wall covered with onks, which of course means life, and had me take his picture in front of it. We're now in Luxor, staying at the Hotel Horus. We're about a half block from the famous Luxor Temple. I was taken back by the sight of Karnak. Apparently they just kept building on for thousands of years. Rows and rows of columns, with much of the ceiling still intact. Vivid colors. It must have been really awe-inspiring in its time. I tried to remember all I could of what I saw, but I know it's hopeless. I tried to photograph it both with still and movie camera, but that is hopeless also. You just can't imagine what it's like without actually being there. It was really a sight. There was a large statue of Ramses II with his wife, about 1/10 his size. I asked Eric if he knew why she was so much smaller, and he said yes, it is because of his importance. I was so pleased he understood and remembered everything so well. He's able to read letters here and there on the hieroglyphs, which adds a lot to his interest. Ramses II's burial site was quite impressive. I took a still picture of Osiris in 2 views over the staircase. In one, there are lotus flowers on the offering table. In the other view, a papyrus plant. The two flowers represented Upper and Lower Egypt. We went into a big room which Ramses wanted robbers to think was the main room, and behind this room was an unfinished room filled with treasure, as was typical with many such rooms. This was faked to lead the robbers to think this was all there was to the grave. But the architect had made an error, and when the robbers banged the walls all around, they heard an echo on the bottom of one wall, which led to the discovery of the passageway to the real burial site, the real treasure, and more fantastic rooms. The guide very secretively asked me if I'd be interested in an antique, and then he showed me a broken mummy. I would have been disappointed if I went away from Egypt without being offered a fake Egyptian item. We talked to a boy about 18 who wanted to take us on the tour of the Valley of the Queens and Nobles by donkey. We saw the Valley of the Queens and several sites there which were pretty much a bore, but the two we saw in the Valley of the Nobles. The colors were bright and vivid and looked as if they could have been painted last month, except you knew they weren't. Many of the famous scenes we saw and recognized there. The rooms were about 7 feet high, oval top, and looked about 20 feet long, and in almost perfect shape. We saw the Step Pyramid and other burial tombs dating back to the 5th dynasty at Saqqara. There was little left of these, except for the Step Pyramid. The inside chamber was interesting and had a lot of hieroglyphs. We passed a Chinese restaurant, and I told Eric that maybe we shouldn't eat there, as it might seem strange for a couple Americans living in Sweden on a Danish travel tour to Egypt to be in a Chinese restaurant in Cairo.